Welcome to Brandon Hall Group's Excellence at Work podcast. You will hear from industry leaders covering innovative, cutting-edge business, learning, and HR topics that weave current market research and technology into each episode. Our Excellence at Work podcast is hosted by Brandon Hall Group's Chief Operating Officer and Principal HCM Analyst, Rachel Cook.
Thank you for tuning in to Brandon Hall Group's Excellence at Work podcast. Don't forget to subscribe. And I'd like to warmly welcome Kevin Akeroyd, the CEO of Pro Limited, today with me. Hi, Kevin. How are you?
Very good, Rachel. Thanks for having me today.
It's nice to have you. And just to share a little bit about your background with our audience, Kevin, you serve as Pro Unlimited's Chief Executive Officer, and you lead the vision and strategy for the company. He is recognized as one of the technology industry's most tenured and trusted experts. Kevin has held executive leadership roles at some of the world's most notable brands that were category leaders in cloud software, services, and data. Prior to Pro, Kevin served as a global CEO at an industry-leading SaaS marketing and communication software provider, where he took the company public on the New York SE before selling it for $2.8 billion. It's pretty remarkable.
So this will all be all my idea or all my fault, Rachel, and we'll let everybody decide which soon.
And just a little bit about Pro Limited. Serves as hundreds of the world's largest, most recognizable brands. Pro Limited offers modern workforce management and a partner ecosystem supported by data, software intelligence, and services to meet flexible workforce needs. Pro's integrated workforce management platform can adapt quickly to regional or industry economical shifts and provides the speed, scale, and flexibility and transparency and expertise to serve as the holistic platform for the modern workforce. Also want to recognize your company for receiving 2 Excellence Awards in 2021 from Brandon Hall Group.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, thanks. We're big honor. Thank you.
And so let's just dive right into our conversation today, talking about the contingent workforce. How would you describe what the contingent workforce and what is it made up of?
You know, contingent's a pretty broad term. I like to keep it simple and just say there are full-time employees that work for a specific company, and then there are many iterations of non-full-time employees that work for a company, and contingent is basically everything that's not full-time employee. So that could be individual contributor, it could be freelance, it could be a contractor, it could be through a staffing agency. You know, there's lots and lots of types of contingent, but basically, if I work for a brand and I'm not a full-time employee, I'm contingent.
Makes sense. And in today's world, talking about the contingent workforce, we have a lot more employees or a lot more of our teams that are made up of the contingent workforce. And so, of course, that adds some complexity in how we manage them and how we develop them. And so how do companies organize and manage, from your point of view?
Yeah, not well enough, but we're getting there. And it's because it's become so complex so fast. Mm-hmm. COVID and the pandemic certainly didn't create this. We were already pre-pandemic in a world where more and more companies were shifting from, full-time employees in the brick and mortar office locations to non-full-time employees, remote and global, anywhere around the world. That was already happening anyway. Did the whole pandemic the last 2 years accelerate that? Oh my goodness, yes. It really accelerated it in a dramatic fashion for all the obvious reasons. And probably more importantly, when people's businesses didn't implode, as a matter of fact, through that 2 years with remote, global, non-full-time employees, corporate profits soared, stock prices soared, values soared. Companies have really thrived the last 2 years. So It's kind of been an accelerant to keep this on a more permanent basis, right? So most large employers, it doesn't matter what vertical industry they're in and really what country they're in, will agree that this contingent part for all the reasons, right? Nimbleness, flexibility, benefits, all costs, et cetera. The enterprise's plan is to have more than half of their workforce forever now as contingent, not FTE. And probably more importantly, you've got the digital natives, you've got the second parents who can't do FTE but have skills, you've got the aging baby boomers and all the aging skills, you've got the Great Resignation, the Great Reshuffle. I mean, pick the point you want to talk to. The talent, right? Hundreds of millions of the talent, the most specialized white collar talent in the world. They don't want to have full-time employee job. They want to build contingent resumes and have contingent careers too. So you've got both the enterprise hiring company and the top skilled talent, both saying we want to live in a contingent world. So it's become very strategic, and therefore companies are finding themselves having to play catch up. Most companies that are very sophisticated from a technology, data, analytics, right, infrastructure, process, et cetera, on the full-time employee side, because they've been at it for decades, find themselves really materially behind on a contingent. It's like, okay, 40% of my employees are full-time employees, and I'm a PhD in FTE. 60% of my employees are now contingent, and I'm probably still in grade school. I'm not even in high school or college, never mind an MBA or a PhD. So people are looking at governance. They're looking at, skill sets. They're looking at processes. They're looking at technology. They're looking at, right, consolidation. They're really looking at managing this in a much more sophisticated, much more way. And they have to, because the compliance and statutory and regulatory and risk environment's gone up. The global factors have gone up. The numbers have gone up, right? The talent experience and the requirements there. The whole world's really changed on everybody the last couple of years. And that was a very long-winded way to say most Global 2000 companies are rapidly trying to catch up and rapidly trying to take, what they thought they had 10 years to do and squeeze it into the next 2, given the strategic importance here.
Sure. And you mentioned a couple of points that describes why it is a competitive advantage for the workplace or for employers to have a contingent workforce. Is there anything else that you left out?
I think I'll just probably not left out. I'll just reiterate, given that the talent supply chain is such that if you do not effectively have a good employer brand and get good at attracting, developing, retaining, and then redeploying contingent talent, you will be at a severe disadvantage, right, in your war for talent and just your overall ability to compete. So I'll reiterate that it's a seller's market, right? It's the talent has the power, the employer doesn't. And therefore, right, just there's a sheer necessity component to it. And then there's all the strategic stuff like flexibility, like nimbleness, like cost up and down, like risk mitigation, et cetera. So I think that's probably not new. I would put them in that order. One, there's all kinds of benefits to the enterprise. Even if there weren't, the talent is going to demand that we go this way. And that's really the most important of all.
Of course. And being more flexible and agile.
That's
and, right. It's just kind of like learning how you develop your people.
That's right. Like great example, right? Awesome company right here in the Bay Area where I live. 7-star restaurants, in the lobby of the office, great. Daycare in the office, great. Yoga rooms, meditation rooms, great. Right, 2-story buses with coffee and Wi-Fi to get people to and from. Amazing employer brand and amazing worker, employee experience, but all of those are full-time employee in the office concepts. They do not apply to 200,000 remote, global, non-contingent, non-full-time workers around. So that's an example of a brand that has had to rethink the brand, right? The benefit, the overall value prop for a couple 100,000 contingent workers, and it has very little to do with the value prop for their 100,000 FTEs. And, that's just one company among thousands, but that's the kind of change that the enterprise is actually going through right now. Yeah.
And Kevin, you mentioned technology early on in our conversation. So what is a contingent workforce platform? What does that look like?
Yeah, I think that there are a couple of, we like to say that there's probably 6 key Maslow hierarchy of needs, eat, sleep, drink. There's a set of tech-enabled services, things like the historical MSP, which you cover very, good on your end. There's a tech-enabled services layer. Second, but that's not just good enough for traditional staff aug. You've got to have a different set of services for SOW and strategic sourcing. That's different than diversity and inclusion. That's different than curation and employer experience for direct sourcing. So you now have a suite of services, not just the old MSP. Layer 2 is a software layer. And again, staff augmentation software, that's the VMS marketplace, which again, you and your audience know incredibly well. That's Beeline, Pro Unlimited, Coupa, Workday Binley, SAP Fieldglass. Super important. But the VMS, including ours, doesn't do diversity and inclusion, It doesn't do SOW. It doesn't do direct sourcing, right? It doesn't do any of those. So now there's a suite of software, not just the VMS. Layer 3 is the data. Mercer, ADP, Radford, Aon, Salary.com, Paycor. There's a multi-billion-dollar industry selling data to corporations to edify what they should pay their FTEs. That's been a complete blank spot for what they should pay their 60% of their contingent workforce, even though that's now a bigger spend. So there's a data layer, right, that needs to be applied specific to each one of those. The fourth layer is just intelligence and analytics. How do we make this intelligent rather than just brute force the way we've done it the last 30 years, both from a services and staff for? The fifth layer is that employer of record, right? Because obviously by contingent, right, it's a co-employment thing. So the employer of record layer, and along with that, compliance, regulations, statutories, risk, benefits, et cetera. It's a pretty complex layer because the Fortune 500 company basically outsources the employer of record and everything around it, right, to whoever the provider is, Pro or one of Pro's many combiners. So that's the fifth layer. And then the sixth emergent one is the term that I used about 5 minutes ago, which is the worker experience layer. How do I make sure that they get real-time pay, for instance, streamed to their wallet? How do I make sure they get best contingent benefits? How do I make sure they get world-class payroll services? How do we give them data-driven recommendations on the next great contingent job? How do we actually stay engaged? How do we suggest redeployment? So basically, we think that there are 6 really key components, and each one of them is different for staff aug versus SOW versus diversity inclusion versus direct sourcing. So you've got 20 or 25 really core needs for a large enterprise. And historically, the enterprise has had to go contract with 19, 20 different vendors to capture each one of those, right? And then instead of driving business outcomes and winning the war for talent and getting hundreds of millions of dollars out of my P&L, I'm spending 3 years nightmare of people, process, and systems integrating between 20 different vendors, never mind those 20 vendors into my complex enterprise, people, process, and systems. That's where the industry finds itself right now. But just like what happened, the sales line of business used to have that. Now there's one system of record from Salesforce or Microsoft. That used to be the case for the marketer. Now there's one system of record from Adobe or Salesforce. It used to be the case for finance. Now there's one system of record or platform from Oracle or SAP. And even on the full-time employee side, right, we've gone from 20 different vendors to one platform or system of record for HCM, like a Workday. Basically, the contingent workforce is in the middle of that, right now, for all the obvious reasons. This part of the industry has got to go from 20-point solutions to one platform or, one system of record. And that's basically what it is how do we have one platform that can do most of that data, analytics, intelligence, services, payroll from one integrated solution, not 20, right? And then how can it can satisfy most of the end-to-end workflow. It can talk to the other HRIS or procurement or ERP or, other data systems. It's interoperable and it satisfies the whole business globally rather than just a piece of the business, regionally. So there's 100 different definitions of platform, at least. That's how we talk about it. And that's how we define it when we use the term here for contingent workforce management platform.
What would you say the maturity of the time frame getting to that point where it is more unified?
I would say, and this is kind of a personalized answer, I feel like when I started in the industry, and by the way, I think your audience probably knows, I am brand new to the industry. I didn't even know what contingent workforce management was 2 years ago, but I got so excited about it when I learned what all this was happening. So I'm a 2-year veteran of contingent workforce management, solutions. I'm not a 20-year veteran, but I think, when I started in 2020, I think that the client demands were a little bit more sophisticated than the vendor community, right? Whether those are services vendors or data vendors or software vendors or payroll vendors. I think in the last 2 years, right, you just look at all the investment, you look at all the mergers and acquisitions, you look at all the private equity or venture or corporate money. There has been this massive growth spurt by the vendor community, including Pro, right, and a lot of Pro's competitors. And I actually think now that the vendor community is a little ahead of the customers now, and now the platforms have started to mature. A lot of things have been built and integrated and put together. And now it's a little bit where the Fortune 500 or the Fortune 1000 or Global 2000 enterprise is actually trying to get themselves up the maturity curve to use, more and more of the enabling, platforms and the enabling technology now. So it's been an interesting flip, my first 2 years in the industry, but I really do think that's where it is now. We're not only rolling out the platform for customers, we're really teaching them what good looks like, what best practice is, thought leadership. We're helping them architect a maturity model to utilize a powerful platform, because you can have the best platform in the world, but if the large global 2000 enterprise doesn't know how to use it, so what? The platform will just sit there and collect dust and do no good for anybody. So that's where I think we are.
That's a good point, because we saw that a lot with learning systems or talent systems, where, and actually it was the technologies that drove the innovation, the disruption, and not so much the market.
And that happens in almost every category. Oh, Rachel, I'm sorry. I talked at the same time you did.
Oh, it's okay. Even though there's a need for it, in its reverse here, I think the contingent workforce, or the increase of the contingent workforce is kind of driving the demand for better management, better data, better transparency. So, so the curve should probably be shorter than, let's say, a learning legacy system where you're trying
I think so too. Yeah. No, you nailed it. Interestingly enough, and I've been kind of in tech for almost 25 years now. I started when I was 10. Because I'm only 35 now. But more often than not, a lot of the innovation does come right from the tech vendor community once these things started, and it did in all those other categories, right? And I see it happening the same way here too. So it is interesting, but I think that's exactly right. And I really agree with the second point you just made, Rachel. We're talking to the same Fortune 1000 enterprise. It's like, you've already done this with CRM, you've done it with ERP. You've done it with MarTech, right? You've done it with HCM. You've done this in almost every other line of business in your company. This isn't new to you, company, right? Enterprise. You just haven't done it here. But, right, there's so many lessons learned from all the other places it's been done. There's no reason why this can't get done at a much faster, much more streamlined, and much more accelerated timeline than it would happen otherwise. So I couldn't agree more with that last comment you made.
Sure. And what is the expectation from contingent employees as far as their development, and what should employers be responsible for? How should they invest in developing their contingent employees?
I think that first and foremost, we need to realize that our full-time employee brands probably do not resonate enough with contingent, right? And that's a blanket statement we could spend another 2 hours on, but first and foremost, I use that example of that big company in the Valley, right? Don't assume that just because you're an extremely attractive full-time employee brand that translates into contingent, because more often than not, it won't. So focus on your brand. And then and again, the contingent worker has kind of been a second-class citizen, right? Do they get invited to the happy hour that FTEs do? No, they don't. Right? Do they have access to the same systems and content? No, they don't. Do they have the same security access? Do they get invited to calls? There's been this FTEs of the first-class citizens, contingent is the second-class citizen, rectifying that and really getting inclusion and equity to the point where they're both first-class citizens is really, really key. And I could go off for an hour on that, too. But I won't. But hopefully that makes sense, Rachel. You've got to treat these people as important and that right, and therefore that worker experience, right? The same company that has had religion around employee experience for 15 years, but hasn't even started on contingent worker experience. You must play catch up and get there in a year, right? Because the contingent worker, if anything, that extremely talented, engineer, she has 6-month contract offers from Salesforce and Microsoft and Amazon and Netflix and Facebook and Apple and Google and LinkedIn and right. She's got 15 world-class offers from 15 world-class companies. She's going to choose one of them, do her 6-month contract, go skiing for 6 months, then come back. And she'll have 15 offers from those same companies when it's time for her to come back off the ski hill and do her next 6-month, tech contract. If we don't cater to that, we're going to lose her, right? Thousands of her, tens of thousands of her, and we're going to lose the war for talent. So that whole work experience and everything around that, absolutely mission critical. And I think then just the success factor, the performance tracking, we've tech and data and analytics enabled the full-time employee side with very robust HRIS and analytics and HCM and ATS, et cetera. It's been tooled right on the full-time employee side we're 10, 15 years behind that on the contingent, not to be a broken record, but that
Sure.
same tooling, right, with data, analytics, intelligence, software, automation, tracking, data visualization, all that. We just got to catch up and get this thing as tech and data enabled as the HCM, full-time employee side. So again, I could prattle on for hours there, but I think those are some of the biggest ones to answer your question.
Of course. And obviously there's challenges, as you mentioned quite a bit here with, the software, the tools, the management. Any other challenges that our leaders should anticipate or be aware of?
I think mostly, there again, to go back to the platform, if I don't have executive sponsorship, right, if I don't have the C-suite driving this, right, if this just gets left for the next 5 years, the way it has the last 25 and say, hey, director of talent mobility or hey, director of procurement, you guys go figure this out. No, that change management is not going to, happen. So it has to have true executive level, board level support to say, this is now number one or number two in my entire workforce optimization, workforce transformation, talent landscaping, right? War of the future for talent, pick your buzzword. If the board and the C-suite don't get it, they better get it, fast. So executive sponsorship really needs to happen. Frameworks, analytics, KPIs, what does good look like? What am I optimizing for? Am I optimizing for location, for volume, for cost, for skill, right? For convert to perm, for redeployment? If I don't have analytics, frameworks, KPIs, and goals, it's like setting off on a hiking trip with no map and not really knowing where I'm going, right? So sounds remedial, but most Fortune 500 companies don't even have that 3 or 4 year roadmap about where I want to get to. Got to get that. The overall then, I'm going to use this buzzword that sounds like I'm a consultant, but change management. This is what we're talking about is a really big change management, function inside their own organization. Because again, we are pros peers, can provide all the enabling tools to a large enterprise, but if they don't, right, adopt and then drive change, skills, accountability, governance, et cetera, that's not going to happen. And then again, I think I'll repeat again, the commitment to skill up and be able to become fluent on the tech data and analytics piece, just like I've skilled up in CRM or ERP or HCM or the others. There's got to be a commitment to reskilling inside the hiring organization because they don't have the skills to manage the contingent side. And a lot of it gets outsourced to the MSP, which is great, but there's still a fair amount of reskilling that has to happen in the hiring enterprise, despite the fact that the MSP does a lot of the heavy lifting. So those are some of the things that I think are actually probably more important than the technology platform. Because again, if the enterprise doesn't nail those, the platform's not going to do them any good.
Sure. Well, Kevin, you made some really good points, especially around, kind of thinking about it's really changing their philosophy in the organization.
It's mindset, commitment. Yeah, exactly.
And obviously, if it's driven from the executive level, then they're going to drive that change because they're going to have a clear vision for it and have, be able to execute on it. But if not, and companies struggling trying to figure out, how, who should be, what part of their organization should they allocate towards the contingent workforce, or, is their goal, oftentimes they want to convert the contingent workforce into a full-time. And, with that mindset, if somebody is not really looking for a full-time position and they just really want to have that type of position, it's something that really need to think about.
Well, and not to get super granular there, Rachel, but in that little example, what is my goal? Because if my goal is to use contingent as just a pipeline to convert to perm versus a permanent shift to go from 30% to 60%, who I'm after is fundamentally different, right? Because Kevin wants to convert to perm, so let's go get him. But if my goal is a permanent contingent worker and just redeploy them, but Kevin's looking for a full-time job, I made a mistake bringing Kevin onto that 6-month project, right? So I realize that's an incredibly tactical example, but it's actually a really important one because magnify that times 100,000 contingent workers in a large company, and all of a sudden that's pretty important. And then I just want to reinforce one thing too. It is all that, but it really is kind of almost governance. And I like this example too. This was very surprising to me. Direct sourcing is certainly a big topic, right? In this whole world, very few things are getting discussed more than the shift to direct sourcing. where I'm finally sourcing contingent talent directly rather than through the professional services firm or through the staffing agency. So, you literally got a CFO and a chief procurement officer that I roll out Concur or Ariba or Coupa, right? A direct sourcing initiative. We're going to roll that thing out in 6 months, and then there is 100% adherence. Nobody buys a pencil. Nobody buys a rental car. Nobody buys a piece of furniture. This is now the sourcing program for the entire corporation, and we have governance, and you will adhere, right? You're not allowed to go buy something, right? Yet on the strategic sourcing side, for contingent work, there's a $2 billion spend. We know there's 40% waste in there. There's $800 million to go get. Yet the same corporation that won't even let you buy a pencil unless it goes through the strategic sourcing platform will actually let 900 individual hiring managers still continue to do whatever they want to do. So even that, you need to put the same discipline and governance around a strategic sourcing around your talent that you did around your pencils and your office chairs, right? And your rental car corporate contract, right? And amazingly enough, the Fortune 500 is not doing that, which is a bit head scratching, but they need to. So not to get too granular there, but the commitment to do this, is just super critical. And from our lens, we would just quite frankly like to see that the enterprise get a little more serious about that because it's a surprising gap right now.
Mm-hmm. And we see it in our research, and it goes back to the point you made about change management, changing in their philosophy, and has to be driven by the top down, and it really have to align your goals to what you want. From what is your main purpose of this, and how does that look, and who are you recruiting for? So all of that follows, your strategy. Kevin, great conversation. Thank you for joining me. You made some really good points and provided some great expertise and insights on this topic. Is there anything else you'd like to wrap up with?
No, Rachel, thanks very much for having us. It's a big, important topic. I know it's one your audience really cares deeply about, and is the middle of it. So we really appreciate the opportunity to speak to your audience and collaborate with you guys, because it's pretty important stuff, and we're really, really excited about being one of the companies that's out there trying to help organizations move forward. So I've taken up enough precious oxygen. I appreciate it very much, and hopefully we'll get an opportunity to do this again soon.
I hope so too, and it's an important topic. It's fascinating, and I think why it's so fascinating because it hasn't yet. I think there's a lot of opportunity for companies to make improvements. And when you see that, you see there's so much benefit. It's not the same story.
That's right.
Being told over and over. I think there's a lot of change that needs to take place 100%. And the benefits will outweigh the challenges.
There's going to be growing pains and challenges for sure. But gosh, I think, it's about $1.5 trillion spend just in this country. And it's about a $4.5 to $5 trillion spend a year globally. Mm-hmm. You don't find too many $5 trillion marketplaces that are this immature, but this is one of them. So, again, we're just super excited to help clients, kind of bridge that maturity gap and, really capitalize, because it's a threat right now, but it's also a massive opportunity. I mean, I'll close with saying the most obvious thing in the world: the companies that win the war for talent are going to win, right? Sure. And this has now become the biggest issue in the war for talent. So we're looking forward to working with partners like yourselves and the end user clients to just continue to help educate the teams to go start winning that war for talent.
Likewise. Well, let's continue to have this discussion and sharing some expertise on how we can help companies. And it'll be interesting to see how quickly we evolve here and where we are in the next couple of years, because I feel, this has been kind of the way of change, and now it's necessary. So thank you.
We see it the same way. So thanks, Rachel, and thanks to your audience for listening.
Take care.
All right, take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.